Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today, we're looking at the story of the man who saved the world. And just before we get started, I will say that this video is brought to you by Audible. You can go to audible.com/brainfood to start your free trial and to get a free audiobook today. In 1962, the US and the Soviet Union were on the brink of possible mutual destruction. The world as a whole was facing a possible nuclear winter and all the devastation that would come with it. The Cold War had been escalated to tepid and was close to becoming hot with the failure of the Bay of Pigs in 1961 and the ensuing Cuban Missile Crisis. In May 1962, Soviet President Nikita Khrushchev and Cuban President Fidel Castro reached a secret agreement that allowed the Soviets to start building missile sites in Cuba, including stocking them with nuclear missiles, 42 of them in total. It should be noted here that the US at this time had nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy that could hit Moscow within 16 minutes of being launched. On the flip side, the Soviets had plenty of nukes pointed at and perfectly capable of destroying the US's allies throughout Europe. However, the Soviets did not have nearly the capability to precisely destroy targets in the United States itself. Certainly they had enough nukes to destroy all the major cities in the US and more, but they were at this time lacking in extremely reliable intercontinental ballistic missiles to adequately function as a mutual destruction deterrent. Indeed, there were some in the US brass that felt that the loss of allies throughout Europe and the lesser direct casualties from long-range nukes that managed to hit their targets in the US were acceptable losses given the payoff that would be the annihilation of the Soviet Union and the end of that threat to the United States. So if the Soviet Union had nukes in Cuba, that tipped the balance in the Cold War back to even rather than in the US's favor as before. In the fall of 1962, the United States sent a US U-2 aircraft to fly over Cuba to attempt to confirm the rumors that they had heard about the Soviet missile sites in Cuba. On October 14th, 1962, the U-2 arrived back with pictures of these missile sites. A day later, the pictures were presented to President Kennedy. Tensions rose and alarms were sounded, and thus on October 15th, 1962, the 13-day ordeal that became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis began. Vasily Arkhipov was born on January 30th, 1926 to a poor peasant family near Moscow in a town of Staraya Kupavna. At the age of 16, he began his education at the Pacific Higher Naval School. Vasily saw his first military action as a minesweeper in the Pacific Theater at the tail end of World War II. In 1947, he graduated from the Caspian Higher Naval School and served on submarines in the Soviet Black Sea, Northern and Baltic fleets. In 1961, Vasily got his first taste of crisis management in an incident that, while extremely momentous, wasn't even close to what he'd come to deal with later. This first incident happened when Vasily was appointed deputy commander of the new K-19 sub, today known as the Widowmaker, one of the first Soviet nuclear subs, which was also equipped with a nuclear ballistic missile. On July 4th, 1961, as the sub was conducting exercises near Greenland, a major leak was discovered in the radiant cooling system. Since no backup cooling system was installed pre-sail, the reactor on the sub was in real danger of a nuclear meltdown. In order to prevent a nuclear accident unlike any the world had ever seen before, the captain of the sub sent workers into the high radiation areas to build a cooling system on the spot. Every member of the sub did what they could to prevent the disaster. Vasily, lending his engineering expertise, helped contain the overheating reactor. The crew succeeded, but not before those workers and many on the crew developed radiation sickness. Every worker that was sent as first responders into the high radiation areas died within days. Due to this, a mutiny nearly erupted on board the K-19 sub. Vasily backed his captain in continuing the work and was eventually awarded a medal for his bravery in a time of crisis and for his loyalty to the Soviet Union. All of this, though, would be a precursor to the day that Vasily Arkhipov saved the world. After his time on the K-19 sub, Vasily was made second in command of the B-59, one of 4 attack submarines that was ordered to travel to Cuba on October 1st, 1962. The sub contains 22 torpedoes, one of which was nuclear, holding the same strength as the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. The captains of each of these 4 subs was given permission to fire their nuclear torpedoes at their own discretion, so long as they had the backing of the political officer on board. Unknown to the crew of the B-59, the United States began their naval blockade of Cuba on the 24th of October and informed the Soviets that they would be dropping practice depth charges, think warning shots, to force subs to surface and be identified. Moscow could not communicate this information to the B-59 due to it being too deep underwater to receive radio transmissions. On October 27th, 1962, US destroyers and the aircraft carrier USS Randolph located the sub, trapped it, and began dropping depth charges to force it to surface. The sub's crew, which had been traveling for nearly 4 weeks with very little communication with Moscow, was tired and not aware of the circumstances. The sub's captain, Valentin Savitsky, believed that nuclear war had already broken out between the Soviet Union and the US and wanted to fire the nuclear torpedo. Fortunately, particularly given the heightened tensions at the time, in this case, one other person had veto power over firing besides the captain and the political officer, and that was the second-in-command, Vasily Arkhipov. Vasily, despite being second-in-command on the B-59, was the leader of the fleet of the 4 Soviet subs sent. Had Vasily not been present, nuclear war would have likely happened, as both the captain and the political officer wanted to launch the nuclear torpedo. Vasily vehemently disagreed, arguing that since no orders had come from Moscow in a long time, such a drastic action was ill-advised and the sub should surface to contact Moscow. A heated argument then broke out, and legend has it that punches were thrown. Eventually, though, Vasily won the day. His reputation as a hero in the K-19 mutiny reportedly helped in the debate, and the sub eventually surfaced. Upon meeting their American enemies, they were instructed to head back to Russia. They obliged. Additionally, they began to have mechanical issues on board the sub, and they headed east. And with that, nuclear war was averted. Vasily Arkhipov was a hero once again. When the sub arrived back in Russia, the crew of the B-59 were met with trepidation. After all, they had pretty much surrendered to the Americans. Said one Russian admiral to the submariners, "It would have been better if you had gone down with your ship." Despite the not-so-hero's welcome he originally received from the Soviets upon his return, to his wife, Olga, Vasily was always the man who saved the world. The man who prevented nuclear war was a Russian submariner. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. I was proud, and I am proud of my husband. Always. And now for some bonus facts. Due to the large number of nuclear accidents occurring during the construction and service time of the K-19 sub, it was nicknamed by the Russians Hiroshima. At no point did they ever call it Widowmaker, despite it being known as that today. That nickname was given to it and popularized by the 2002 movie K-19 The Widowmaker, starring Harrison Ford and Liam Neeson, and directed by Catherine Bigelow. While the movie is fairly historically accurate, the characters do not have the same names as the actual crew members. The character, played by Peter Sarsgaard, is probably based on Vasily Arkhipov. Vasily continued serving in the Soviet Navy. He was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1975. Later, he would become the head of the Kirov Naval Academy. He retired in the mid-1980s. He passed away in 1999 at the age of 73 as the result of complications due to radiation exposure from his time aboard the K-19. Alright, so at the top of the show I mentioned that this video is brought to you by Audible. If you watch this show regularly, you know that I've mentioned Audible before, and today, well, I get to tell you about them again. Alright, so the way I feel about this is it's pretty simple. Hey, if you're watching this channel, you're probably into learning, especially if you watched it to the end. Listen, you're in that learning demographic, and if you're in that learning demographic, well, Audible, it's the way I feel about Audible as a sponsor for this show. It just fits well because, you like learning. Audible has a ton of non-fiction. I mean, they got fiction as well, but I listen to mostly non-fiction. It's kind of the side I prefer. I mean, if you want to go listen to fiction, awesome, but I like to recommend non-fiction stuff. But, if you like learning, you'll like Audible. It's as simple as that. Audible's been around for a while. There's a good chance a lot of you already have it, but if you don't, now is your chance, because you can get an Audible book totally for free with a trial membership by going to audible.com/brainfood. Now, I was having a think about what I wanted to do in this ad read, and I apologize, Audible, if I'm going to go off script here, but I was having a look on my phone at my audiobooks that I've previously listened to. Let me bring it up. I was just scrolling through. I've got dozens of books on here that I've listened to over the years, and I know Audible like me to mention a book that I'm kind of listening to right now, but I think it was the first book that I ever got, so it might have actually been that free book. It's this book. Can you see that? If you can't. It's called Masters of Doom. It's narrated by Will Wheaton. Hold on. Which is a perk if you like Will Wheaton. I love Will Wheaton.
Created in 1976, the first Apple computer.
I don't know if you can hear that, but it's awesome. I think one of the reasons Audible like me to talk about a book that I'm listening to currently is because I know why it's so great. All I can remember is that this book is amazing. It's about the guys who started and made Quake and Doom, and it's kind of these two young, super creative guys building this empire, having there's like a rivalry going on as well. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I do remember that it's amazing. I'm probably gonna go listen to it again. But listen, if you're not into that, if that's not your sort of thing, don't worry, they've got loads of other stuff. I typed knitting into Audible, 69 results came up. No jokes, if you like knitting, it's probably great as well. Not me, maybe you. Anyway, what's cool, and maybe this demonstrates this quite well, is that book I bought so many, I got as part of, like I said, maybe it was my free trial, maybe not, but years ago, and I can download it again and listen to it again. It's like I own it. It's not a rental service. That book is mine. And listen, if you do want to get your own book for free and join me as an Audible customer, please do head over to audible.com/brainfood. There's also a link in the description below. You get that free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership, and like I say, it's yours for life. So listen, just go check it out. I love Masters of Doom. That's a great recommendation. Also knitting books, 69 of them, if you're interested. Just go check it out, audible.com/brainfood, and thanks to Audible for sponsoring this show.